Skip the jacket.
Okay, Madam Council President, you're live.
Thank you so much. It's 6 o'clock on May 7th. I'd like to call this Middleton Committee of the Whole to order. Could I get some assistance with roll call, please?
Alder Schaefer.
Here.
Alder Madden.
Here.
Alder Kalish.
Here.
Mayor Kuhn.
Here.
Alder Nelson.
Here.
Alder Myers.
Here.
Alder Hanairo.
Here.
Alder Lorman.
Here.
Alder Crow.
Here.
Thank you. Just quickly for our new alder, you probably know this, but the Committee of the Whole is where we get together and we can discuss things and learn things. We're not going to vote on anything this evening. So first discussion item for tonight is the update, discussion, and consideration of the community campus project. And I think I'm going to turn it right back to Brian for his introduction.
Well, first and foremost, we want to provide a thank you for the council members for taking the time to be with us this evening so we can provide you with an update on the work that's been done to date on the campus community project. Over the past couple of decades, this community has been very thoughtful and strategic in investing in our civic infrastructure, including our facilities. City Hall, Library, and Senior Center represent the next three buildings that require some thoughtful reflection on how they will be positioned for the current and future generations of users. It's exciting for all of us to be involved in envisioning what the future could hold for these important facilities. Tonight's meeting is the first opportunity to provide you with a summary of the information gathered to date and to begin a dialogue with you on what you envision the future of these facilities to be. We will take feedback we received tonight from you and again in early June when we have another presentation on this and continue to develop, refine, and enhance the concepts that you see this evening for further community conversation. At the onset, I want to acknowledge and thank the members of the Campus Community Committee for their work and efforts on this project to date, including Katie Nelson, Aaron Summers, Erica Pollock, Jean Phillips, Ken Marquardt, Kate Miller, Justin Boeg, Jen Martin, and Ken Spitzler. In addition, I'd also like to sincerely thank the city staff from several departments for their important involvement in providing data, information, and perspective on the operational and space needs of their respective facilities. It is important to note that we are at the early stages of examining options, and there will be lots of information provided tonight. In addition to questions and feedback from this evening, we also envision additional discussion with the council at our meeting on June 3rd, approximately. As a reminder, the council has approved sustainability goals for this project related to energy efficiency, net zero water, stormwater management, celebrating natural resources, striving for zero waste, and more. If newer council members need a refresher on these sustainability or other goals established for the project, you can find those and other resources at www.cityofmiddleton.us/ccc. Please reach out to staff with any questions that you might have about this project or the materials provided here tonight. I'd like to now turn things over to Andy Lyons from EUA, our consultants, to introduce the consulting team from SEH, EUA, and Findorf and kick off the initial project review. We will also hear from Assistant City Administrator and Finance Director Bill Burns on some preliminary financial analysis this evening as well. So Andy, please take things away.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for your time. Is this on? Brian, we're good? Maybe.
Hey, if that's not on, just since there's a second breathing, is there any way we can have a fan brought in here?
Let me check.
Thank you.
I was just telling my colleague I wore a wool suit, which
Yeah, I
was
did
not
the
a good
same.
choice tonight. Not a good choice.
Sometimes it's freezing in here.
So I
Right.
hear that there's some HVAC issues.
Noted. Noted. Yes. Okay. Let's get rolling. My name's Andy Lyons. I'm with Epstein Ewan Architects, EUA. Before we get to the agenda and all of the content that we're talking about tonight, I want to give my colleagues here an opportunity to introduce themselves. John, why don't you go ahead?
Good evening, everyone. My name is John Chapman. I'm a principal with EUA here in Madison.
And again, Andy Lyons with EUA. I do communications, engagement, and some planning work as well.
Good evening, everybody. My name's John Tucker. I'm with Middleton Construction. I'm a pre-construction executive. What's going on?
And my name is Nate Day. I'm with SEH, project manager for this segment of the study.
Okay. At the outset here, I just want to review the agenda for tonight. We've got a good solid 2 hours. We hope that we'll be able to convey a lot of information to you tonight. Get all of your questions answered and hopefully get some input from all of you, some advice moving forward. So our agenda tonight, we want to provide a little bit of background about the CCC. We've been in operation now for the better part of 5-6 years, since 2019. They have done a lot of very hard work, and I think have met now maybe 25 times. Okay. We want to spend a little bit of time talking about the options that have been developed thus far, and of course, talk about costs related to those options. Bill is going to spend some time on the financial analysis, tax impact, et cetera, of each of those options. And then, of course, as I said earlier, we want to spend a fair amount of time facilitating a conversation with all of you. So we're coming back with input on what you have heard tonight. And then we'll conclude with a couple of next steps we see moving forward. So a couple of housekeeping items, couple of caveats that we want you to keep in mind. First of all, let's keep this super loose. This is a workshop, committee of the whole. If you have any questions at all, please feel free to interrupt at any time. We've got a lot of information here to present to you, a lot of concepts. If you have any questions at all, please interrupt and feel free to jump in, okay? Yeah, thumbs up? All right, good. Couple of caveats, couple of things to keep in mind. We are very, very early yet in this process. We have done a lot of work, a lot of background work. We've gathered a lot of data, but this is a very iterative process. We're still in the early stages of planning. And let's say a word or two about that planning. We are sketching out big kind of square foot concepts right now. We are nowhere near design. Tonight, we will not be talking about exterior materials, number of glass panes, where certain spaces go, how many offices there are, that sort of stuff. We're sketching out very, very big ideas and the square footages associated with those ideas. Things are going to change over time, right? Again, this is an iterative process. We're going to get your feedback, and in response, we will revise, refine, okay? So a lot of sifting and winnowing as we move forward. And let me say this. You are going to have a lot of opportunities to gather more information from us, talk about these ideas, again, refine these ideas. We really value your input, and we want to make sure that there are plenty of opportunities throughout the next coming months to speak to us and refine these plans. Okay? All good? Yeah? Okay. We'll keep rolling here.
Start out with just going through the 5 goals that were developed last June when the next iteration of the Community Campus Committee formed, got together and formed these 5 goals. The first one being identifying opportunities to modernize and or replace the city's current public facilities in downtown Middleton where needed and appropriate. Second one.
Oh, sorry.
Identify opportunities for more efficient utilization of land through opportunities for combined facilities, flexible spaces that can serve more than one purpose, and underground shared parking opportunities. Third one is ensure that municipal facility space needs are met and can accommodate future growth of the city. Fourth is enhance downtown Middleton by creating concepts for municipal buildings that will be visually appealing, inviting, customer friendly, accessible, and functional. And last but not least, align with the city's approved sustainability goals for the civic campus. So are we all clear? I mean, that was the mission. That's what we have been, developing these options and cost estimates with these underlying goals in mind.
And let me say a word or two about these goals. These are essentially the background, the backbone of this planning process. Ultimately, we're going to ask your input on assessing these goals versus the options and costs that have been developed. All right. So it's really important that you're thinking holistically about these goals and how they relate to the options that you'll be presented tonight and the costs and tax impact associated with those options. So keep those goals in mind. The city is in the process of creating a matrix to assess each of these goals. That information is going to be presented on the 22nd to the Community Campus Committee, and you'll see that information as well. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about, Brian, can you advance? There we go.
It's working.
Point to that us.
Yeah, I guess I need a pointer over there. Okay, so a little bit of background and context about the CCC, Community Campus Committee, which was established back in 2019 and did work through 2020. Again, a lot of data analysis, a lot of assessment. We identified the needs of the three different facilities: City Hall, Senior Center, and library. We developed a number of options at that point in time and assessed those options against costs. So we had some cost estimates at that time. Ultimately, that information was presented to City Council and potentially Planning Commission as well back in 2020. There was a hiatus. There was a pause. COVID, right? So COVID put a hard pause on that work, and we began our work again in 2020, June of 4, in fact. And we needed to bring everybody back up to speed. So we did some of that same work that we did in 2019, validating information, validating those program needs. We did a lot of work with committee members on other facilities. We did these tours out on the southeast, out in the southeast part of the state, looking at libraries, city halls, community centers, senior centers. And we did some locally as well, looking at the Wanakee facility and a couple of others as well. And then, of course, the CCC did tours in the immediate Hubbard Street area as well, taking tours at the library, the senior center, and City Hall. Bill provided us with some background, financial context, and ultimately we began redeveloping options. We did a 2-day design charrette with the members of the CCC blocking out space, seeing what fits where, which building should go together. It was a really fun, interactive exercise that really was kind of the basis of the current iterations of the options that you'll see in a little while. We assigned costs to those options. We got some really great background and context from city staff. We engaged city staff as well to help refine the program, the overall square footage of each of the buildings. And we also assigned costs to those options. At some point here in the not too distant future, we're going to meet again with the CCC. And as Brian indicated, sometime in June, most likely, we're going to come together again and present a final report or final presentation. Okay, so with all of that said, let me just pause very briefly. Any questions, any comments that you have about kind of background and context?
Maybe before we do that, we do have a fan in town, so if the council wants a fan, let me know where you want.
Council gets the fan apparently. Yes, was a question. Yeah.
Hi, I have a question, and it's just, how did the needs change from the pre-COVID work to post-COVID?
Yeah, well, very good question. So we did some initial costing work back in 2020, and the costs at that point in time were significant. We made the decision at the CCC. We needed to refine the overall square footage numbers and recost that information. That's not to say that needs haven't disappeared, but there's this like delicate balance between needs, costs, tax impact, and other goals that Nate just laid out. So I anticipate this being, again, an iterative kind of ongoing process, thinking about what are priorities, what are kind of nice to haves, and what are need to haves as we think, hard about costs. Does that answer your question, Lisa?
Yes, thank you.
Any other questions?
Just a comment. I don't know if it was affected, but I think our knowledge of personal space changed for everyone in the world during COVID, and that might have changed how we think about these spaces as well.
Yeah, good thought.
That's a good point.
Good thought. Yes.
Yeah, the project goal, so a question on the project goals. So the project goals are primarily going to drive the options and stuff. So have we disseminated and communicated the project goals with the public? Have we got their comments on the project goals?
Yeah, great point. We can talk about this a little bit later. We do recognize that at some point following this study phase, communication and engagement is going to be really, really important, right? This ultimately has to be a citywide conversation. Are we there yet? No. Do we need to be? Absolutely. Yes.
Go ahead, Charles.
Did you have the cost per square foot for these options handy? I didn't notice it in the presentation, and I can of course derive it there, but it would be nice to have them offhand. for each
We
option.
don't have dollar per square foot data. John will be able to speak to that when we review costs. It's
There's
kind
a
of, it's
reason.
a complicated
There's a reason we don't
calculus.
do it.
Yeah, I hear you, but
Any other questions before we get rolling here with options? We'll move forward.
So I apologize if some of what I'm about to say is repetitive. Can you hear me?
A little bit more.
Maybe just push it. Like, there you go.
Like that?
Yeah. that's
All right.
a lot better.
Thank you. I apologize for what I'm about to say. Walk through a project timeline, and we want to make it clear that. Thank you. Is that better?
Mhm.
Thank you.
Okay. We want to make it clear that we're still early in the process. really the first steps in a journey. Spaces have been identified through a step called programming, working with input from your library, senior center, and city hall staff. You will see we have been putting together some planning options. These are initial concepts, kind of building blocks, we call them, that will evolve, like we've said, based on your input and direction.
Okay. Let's take a quick spin through some of these options. High level information, John and John are going to get into the details in a moment or two, but this is a high level overview of the spaces under consideration by the CCC. We've got two options. Essentially, option number one is not to do anything. That's always an option, right? And option number two is doing capital maintenance work in the footprint of the existing buildings. So no change in existing square footage in options number one or option number two, right? Same footprint. We renovate, we add on to space, and in one case, we build all new in all of the subsequent options 3 through 6. Essentially, we've got about the same square footage collectively for each of the options 3 through 6, about 150,000 square feet. And you see the spaces change a little bit here and there. But, you know, we're roughly at around 80 to 85,000 square feet for the library, mid 30s or so for the senior center, and then the same for the city hall building. Again, you'll hear in a moment or two in a little bit more detail about how those spaces change and are expanded. The CCC has been taking a hard look at this, as I said already. They said at the last meeting, options 1 and 2 really do not fit the space needs moving forward for the city of Middleton. We don't have significant space. We're very crunched at City Hall, the senior center, and the library, and therefore we think we should eliminate options number 1 and 2. You'll hear in a moment or two about why option number 3 isn't a great option. Essentially, it retains the City Hall building, which is, speaking bluntly, kind of the stinker of the buildings. So the CCC has left options number 4 through 6 on the table. They also requested a 7th option, which is an all new construction option. You'll see that in a moment or two, but again, it's about 150,000 square feet in total.
We're also looking not only at buildings, but at parking, the subject of parking. And, you know, parking is an important component in any downtown planning exercise. And currently there's about 150 spaces in and around your downtown areas, your municipal buildings. We have been asked to look at a mix of parking. So you can see the sort of different categories here, including underground parking as a potential.
Okay, we're going to move now to cost estimating, and John will talk a little bit about the options as well. But John Tucker from Findorf, why don't you say a word or two about kind of the background behind developing the cost options?
Thanks, Andy. Yeah, so this slide is to try to give you context by how we put these numbers together. And we've heard a lot about how this is very high level, kind of blocks and large spaces to meet the goals that came out of the programming sessions. So just to give you an idea of what we do, and there was a question about cost dollars per square foot, and we can talk about that on, I think, one of the other slides. But when we look at projects like this at this early stage, we don't just go, well, there's a library, a year ago and the cost per square foot was about that. Let's use this on that. We didn't use cost per square foot of model projects. What we do is try to break down based on the information we know today into building components. So we were given like footprints of the buildings, the number of stories, the number of square footages, and some basic understanding of the uses from our walkthroughs and from programming. So we break these parts and pieces down into what we know. So an example would be structure, foundations, skin of the building, and then we use industry standards and historical modeling that tells us how do we assume for a number of doors, number of walls, finishes, mechanical, heating and cooling, electrical, et cetera. So we actually put a lot of thought into putting more than just $1 per square foot. We look at the components needed to meet the goal for each of the options based on square footage, height, number of stories, uses. And so then we also look at what would the cost be? How could we possibly project into 2027? But we try to do the best we can. We're not going out to subcontractors and asking them for bids because there's nothing to bid at this point. It is based on what we understand of like projects in the last couple of years. There's contingency on here for the things that we don't know, and there's about 10% in there. We've got fee in there, and then we also have soft costs. Soft costs are things like fees that you would have to pay, whether they be related to the land or otherwise. They include FF&E, so furniture, fixtures, equipment. It doesn't always necessarily mean when you walk into an office, does it have pens and papers there? But it has everything else you need to walk into the building and occupy it. And we also understand that, like it was mentioned before, we're going to do this many times over and over as we get closer and closer. So really, this is a compass. We're trying to point you in the direction based on these different choices is to help you make a decision, whether it be on just the total number or in context with the tax increment.
Just
Next
one
slide.
quick note, that second to last bullet, that has changed slightly since your last version of this document. We are spelling out here specifically that the $5 million in the base budget is for site energy, sustainable energy, not sustainability, period, okay?
Should I touch on that?
Yeah.
Sorry. So the buildings are all highly energy efficient as we modeled the pricing for them. This dollar amount was based on studying geothermal and solar panels specifically. So we looked at the options and looked at how could we provide geothermal. And you are restricted by the amount of land you have to bore holes in the ground and get geothermal. But we try to anticipate that and take it as far as we could for the different options. And then we also had a consultant look at how many panels might we fit on the roof of any one of these options. But because they're so particular based on how much square footage you have of site and of building, that we looked at them holistically and came up with a range so that we would not lose that as we talk about some of the give and take or the push and pull on these options. We wanted to protect those dollars. And again, it's geothermal and solar. It's on top of, I think our base assumption for your heating and cooling was a VRF system. And this is very akin to projects that meet silver or above in terms of like LEED sustainability. So again, the base cost is highly efficient. And then we're keeping this $5 million allowance to take it even farther. What steps can we take to get as close as we can to, I think net zero was one of the things talked about in terms of goals. So we're trying to anticipate that in this $5 million allowance.
All right, let's take a quick pause here. Any questions about these cost assumptions? You good? Yeah, okay.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Just to clarify, the $5 million, site energy only, whereas before it was for sustainability as a whole.
Yeah,
Let-
Yes.
I'll put it on me. That was my error. $5 million is not the whole of sustainability, the sustainability dollars in the project. You have any number of different sustainable features.
Sure.
Naturally design. It comes to design. So we should clarify, we have clarified, the $5 million is for sustainable energy.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay.
I like having a few tools in the toolbox for sustainability. So, very good.
Great.
Okay, so next we are going to walk through the various options. And we're going to review 7 options, but of course we're starting with number 2. And the reason for that is option 1 is a do nothing option. So we didn't feel that we graphically needed to show that. Option 2 maintains the existing footprints on the 3 buildings. Library to the left, City Hall, and then Senior Center to the right. We renovate the 3 buildings, the concept, modernize the buildings with the MEP systems, mechanical, electrical, and plumbing, and the bulk of the renovations occur at City Hall building. It's probably important to note that both options in 1 and 2, which were crossed out on an earlier slide that you saw, they do not meet the city's current and future space needs. Moving to the next option, number 3, you can see this expands the municipal campus buildings by expanding and renovating each of the facilities. They're all retained. Additions are constructed, built to meet the space requirements of the 3 buildings. Below grade parking is constructed under the library addition. And, knowing the importance of sustainability in your community that we just sort of touched on, we have included some graphic representations of some sustainable concepts. For instance, you'll see photovoltaic panels on some of the roofs. You'll see some of the roofs colored green. Those are just some concepts, and we'll go into further detail on some more sustainability issues later in the presentation.
And if I may, John, you'll also note in all of the options, a plaza street in between the buildings on Hubbard, which would be a permeable street to help manage stormwater runoff and also, a very nice streetscape.
So this is kind of a bird's eye 3-dimensional view. And then we're following that with just some overall kind of planning outlines of the buildings to help show how many stories, how many levels, and things like that. City Hall is in blue on the left. The library is in yellow in the center, and you can see there's a level of underground parking. And then the senior center is in the pinkish color on the right. I think it's, these aren't floor plans, but these were helpful for John Tucker to sort of take some initial conceptual cost estimating exercises as he kind of defined.
And before we move on, John Tucker, can you say a word or 2 about costs for option number 3?
Sure. So option 3 had additions on all 3 existing buildings, library, City Hall, Senior Center, and also had renovations in all 3 buildings. It also included some site work that would be needed for the additions. Also, I think on City Hall here, as you walk up the curved steps and ramp that needed rework, and things that were identified very early in some of the programming. And then it includes, well, all the options include, it's a $3 million price tag on that plaza. So we, again, like on that, that's just not a number that we put it to. We broke it down in parts and pieces in terms of the the new permeable scape, landscaping, et cetera. So again, additions in all three, renovations in all three, site work, and a new street plaza basis for the construction cost. And then on top of that, we've got, again, $5 million to try to utilize solar panels and geothermal.
The next option, number 4, a new library and municipal building is constructed. And that's on the site of the existing senior center, which would be removed. And then the library would be renovated as a senior center. So this shows the 3D, and then in the next slide, you'll see some of the overall kind of conceptual plan of the sizes of each of these components. The colors are the same in terms of the uses, and you know, the new buildings could have some step backs to provide some benefits to the scale of some of these things. So that's some of the thoughts on this option.
John, you want to say a word or two about that?
Sure. So in this one, it was a brand new building for that would contain both the library and the city hall. Renovations to the library for a new senior center. Demolition. So in this option is when we first introduced costs for demolition. And then again, site work for each one, the street plaza, and then the targeted dollars for geothermal and solar. And if you like, I can mention too that on this particular option, if you take all the gross square foot, including, I think the square footages that you're shown here don't include the parking. But in my world, I would include all the gross square foot, and it's about $578 a square foot. And that is in the range of other municipal projects that we have done and looked at in the market in the last 2 years. So we tried to check these against what's being built today.
And you're probably all thinking, how in the heck can they build this thing right over the top of the senior center? Phasing is going to be incredibly important. Findorf is incredibly good at that. And we do have some phasing diagrams that show the different steps of construction. And our commitment thus far has been only one move per building. Okay?
I noticed that price went up a little bit on option 4, just a little. I think the last time the CCC met, it was 111. Or did I just write it wrong somewhere?
No, I can speak to that. So when we reviewed this last, the initial review of option 4 in turning the existing library into a senior center was based on some of the earlier concepts of what needed to be done in the space for this for the library. And because the library was the last updated project, it had the least amount of renovations needed. So when we reviewed the programming for the senior center, we decided that you would need more density, more walls and spaces that wouldn't have to be created in the large open space now. So we made that adjustment and
Great.
changed that.
Does that make sense?
Does.
In option 5, a new library and city hall. 2 new buildings occupy the south side of Hubbard. And then the existing city hall building would be renovated, expanded, and would change use to become a new senior center. So this is the 3D look at that. And then the next slide shows, again, some of the block plans. So a new city hall and library on the left, and the yellow and sort of light blue, with, you can again see an underground parking component, a 4-level structure above that, and then the pink illustrates the new senior center.
I'll turn this over to John T. in one moment. I will note here, in option number 5, we do retain the existing, senior center, building. I'm not making value judgment on that, just, noting, okay?
So here we have a new building, again, for library and city hall combined. We have an addition to the existing city hall, and then we're, modeling City Hall. Senior center, like Andy mentioned, is going to be repurposed. Again, we have demo costs associated with this. Again, we have site costs associated with this, the street plaza dollars. And then we're still carrying targeted geothermal and solar for that $5 million allowance. And this is just under $600 gross square foot, including the square footage of the parking.
Super important point here with respect to option number 5. You see the addition and renovation of the existing city hall into the senior center building. Programming needs for the senior center, roughly 33-ish thousand square feet. In order to hit that, we use the underground portion, the basement portion of the current city hall, which of course is then converted to the senior center. Okay.
And we accounted for a new HVAC system, so. wouldn't have,
Right,
So we
I
don't
was
ma-
actually gonna say that, like, I think that Justin in the CCC committee was concerned, he's like, of all the buildings we save and renovate, this is the sickest one. And I think I was at first like, yeah, wow, and no, it will be renovated to fabulousness. Even though
Within the
right
walls,
now, it's not fabulous. Okay. Charles, go ahead.
Question?
Did you, when you were preparing these, did you prepare them with estimates for permeable asphalt in the above ground parking spaces or impermeable asphalt?
So the,
Increased maintenance cost for the permeable, so I wanted to know if that's what we're.
right, so the plaza is based on permeable, the
Right, I'm asking about the above ground parking
the
spaces.
above ground parking, it's within the costs that we're sharing. We can do that there. I would have to say whether you choose like a permeable asphalt, there's increased cost to that operationally, but they're within the range of costs that we're talking about.
Thank you.
So moving to option 6. So we've got option 1, which is do nothing. We have options 2 through 5, which basically renovate, add on, change use of some of the buildings, things like that. Options 6 and 7 are different in that it's all new construction, okay, for the program. So option 6, new library and city hall on the existing library site. And then city hall would be demolished for a new senior center. So the other important thing to note on that one, much like the previous,
Oops.
you're going the wrong direction.
Yep.
Is that the senior center is still exists. It's empty, or it could be something else. It could be sold, yet to be determined. But that building in this option would still remain. And then the next slide shows again some kind of big picture outline plans. The city hall and library on the left with some underground parking, and then the senior center as a new building that also might have some underground parking.
Do you have a question, Lisa?
Yes, I'm just wondering for the options that would keep the existing senior center, repurpose it or sell it, do the cost estimates factor in the revenue we would generate from selling that building?
No, we have
No.
not, no.
No.
It's an excellent question.
Yeah.
So,
Mhm.
And I had a question too, just clarification. So 5 and 6 are relatively the same for City Hall and Library, right? And then it's just whether we demolish this building or renovate it. That's the main difference between 5 and 6,
Yeah.
right?
Correct.
John wants to word or two about.
Sure. So option 6, like he explained, we have 2 new buildings that will allow for a new senior center, the library city hall combo. Again, we have demo of 2 buildings, like we did in option 4, the site work, the street plaza, and then the allowance for the geothermal and solar opportunity.
And the final option is number 7. We place a new senior center on the south side of Hubbard, and the existing senior center building is removed, and a new library and city hall are constructed in that location. Because this is a relatively new desired option, we don't have a second slide illustrating the overall plans, but this hopefully gives you a feel for the conceptual ideas for option 7.
John, maybe just a word about slight cost difference.
Yeah, so in this particular option, you have demolition of all 3 existing buildings. So that is one of the main differences. And there's no renovation costs. It's all brand new construction. Again, you still have the site, the street plaza, and then the nod to try to getting more geothermal and solar.
A quick summary of the costs.
So again, here's the project cost at the bottom. I would just remind you that the square footages here are like usable net square footages. They don't include the basements. And again, these total dollars, like the $135 million for option 6, that includes the street plaza, dollars trying to get us as close to that net zero target as possible, contingency fees, soft costs for furnitures and equipment. It's trying to project total project cost.
So just a real quick note about that to put a point on it. Library plus senior center plus city hall does not equal total project costs, because there is the street plaza, fees, soft costs, furniture, all of that stuff not spelled out in the matrix. If people are doing that. Okay. And then John, maybe a final word or two about, oh, did we have a question?
Yes, I'm just wondering, can you clarify the plaza between the buildings? Is that replacing the street? Will that be a pedestrian plaza?
Yes, and
Yes,
yes.
all of the colors that we're seeing there is replacing the asphalt. So it's removing the asphalt and putting back permeable materials, whether they're like asphalt, concrete. There's a permeable concrete. There's paver systems that do the same, landscaping. So it's a whole new street that can be
But it
Function
is,
as,
it's a functional street.
it's
It's not a
functional.
pedestrian only.
we're not closing off the street.
okay, that's what I was, okay.
Hopefully we can see a picture of it at some point, but it was pretty exciting because you can park on it. There's no curb, but there are trees that kind of act like a curb. And then eventually we can put, what's the word? Is it bollard or ballard? Bollards on the ends for festivals, etc. Close off the street for temporary.
It's also an excellent way to slow traffic down,
Yeah.
because of all the
Gardens.
textures, colors, the trees. We see that in a lot of urban environments where you still want the car access, but you want to slow that traffic down a little for safety reasons.
ADA.
Okay, final word about sustainability.
Sure.
And questions, of course.
So that actually is a good segue because it really adds a lot to meeting some of your sustainability goals. It would add a lot if you're looking at like a lead scorecard, you're going to get a lot of points that way. It helps just, especially with your goals for trying to capture or deal with water. So it really goes a long ways. And then I also just want to reiterate, when we try to come up with dollars associated with heating and cooling and lighting of the buildings, that it was the base level was a very high level. We used a VRF system for the heating and cooling. We took the same assumptions as we would do with a lead silver or above for the lights and the power. And then, we talked about, we analyzed how many bores would we need for geothermal to try to take care of all the heating and cooling. I don't think we can get there with the amount of space you have, but we've studied it enough that I think we can take steps towards that to reduce that energy cost. And then also, just to reiterate, we had one of our subcontractor friends do a study of all these concepts as to how many panels could we get on the rooftops, and what might we get from that in terms of putting back into the grid. So that will help us in the next steps as to how far can we get with this geothermal and this solar, which are two big pieces towards the goals that you have. So the geothermal, the solar panel, the street plaza, and like I said before, we're gonna go through this a number of times to refine these.
Yeah,
John,
just on that point, you're probably wondering about focus on energy. That is a conversation that we ultimately can have with focus on energy. We do have to narrow down and get some kind of budget parameters from all of you in order to provide focus on energy with a reasonable number of options for them to assess. And I would make the same point with John. We've got some very, very high level estimates here. John will be able to dive deeper, as will our sustainability expert, once we have a little bit more clarity in terms of the direction you all are pointing.
if we chose one of the options where the senior center was left alone, the building to sell or do whatever we want with, if we removed it, would that afford us the space we need for the geothermal?
I don't know if it's enough, but it definitely would go a long ways towards that. We even thought of the street, but there's too many utilities in the street to use that as an option. So it's possible, depends on
Yeah,
things. How many boards we need for the one building on that same side?
Hmm.
And what are our limitations to get across the street to help the building
sure.
there? So I don't know if they would get us all the way, but it would get us a lot closer.
Mhm. Okay, thanks.
Okay, we're going to turn things over to Bill in a
Sorry.
moment or two, but I want to take a pause to make sure that all of you have an opportunity to ask questions or make comments. Yes.
That's a big question to me. I mean, you look at the city hall, it increases by maybe 40%. You look at 40%. We have the library increasing almost 300%. And while we're seeing the massing, most of us, I guess, I'm not real privy to the decisions about what demanded a triple sizing of the library. Maybe somebody could address what all that space is going to be for.
Yeah, so that is a good question and probably an ongoing conversation. That said, the basis for this assessment was a 2016 study that was done by another firm. The space needs at that time were assessed at, I believe, 101,000 square feet. So we have refined and winnowed down, and now currently at 80 to 85,000 square feet or so. Say that again. I'm sorry.
Go on in all that space. I
Um,
mean, we're not going to triple the size of book holdings, I think, not today.
so, significantly more space, for the children's area, the teen area, also the adult nonfiction and, fiction areas. Plus, we have additional space for study rooms. We know that a lot of folks in town value the ability to work at the library. So additional study rooms, small group rooms, and a handful of larger group rooms, on the order of, say that one more time.
Standing music room or meeting rooms, et cetera.
Yes, meeting rooms, as well. So, small group, rooms, large group, rooms, and the large group rooms obviously can be utilized for community space, but also for programming. I believe there's space devoted to art and maker space, for kids and others.
It's the right time for comments, or you want comments?
I'm
What
gonna
do-
get Randall's question in first.
And I could maybe answer some of, like, you did a good job of answering that, but space, yeah, a lot of it is study rooms and stuff. But I did have a question on, and I forget which term you used when you're doing the costs, but the settings or basically the approaches to the buildings. Does that include, I know for like the library, like loading dock, that kind of stuff? I know you haven't done the details of the buildings, but the approaches to the buildings aren't just the front door, so.
No, great question. So yes, the assumptions we made would allow for like the library in particular for, a loading dock. It's not like you would see in a manufacturing
Right.
plant, but most of the libraries we've been involved with do have loading and unloading.
Yeah.
And so, yes, our assumptions include that for all the buildings, though they may vary a little bit.
So book handling, book sorting,
Yeah.
all of that equipment would be included.
Yes.
Correct, John?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
And I know, and the senior center's got meals on in and out of
Right.
it, so that
So,
it's not
yeah,
just necessarily.
so
the
these are
front
back
door.
of house.
Yeah.
Space, and that's
So
included.
that's included.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, and just a general comment, and thanks for this presentation. And I think, I know you're in the early stages here, but I think, for the future, what will help people in formulating their opinion on this will be more specificity. And you shouldn't have it now because you're in the preliminary stages. But I think what Alder Schaefer was getting at is, what are some of the intricate differences between the options? What's the reason for not maintaining status quo versus going to these other options? All of those things are what people are going to need to form their opinion. So, like what will be done at the library in option 4 versus option 5? Just some of those, I think, will be helpful for people to help formulate some responses in the future. Like I said, you're in the developing stages, so this is great for now, but
And
some of
that the matrix that city staff are processing, that will help provide some of that context. But we realize that, once it comes down to engagement and communications, we need to have a clear, concise, but specific message to the community.
I'm going to comment about your massing, because this is my district. I'm already.
Can you speak up? I can hear you. Sorry.
Sorry, that heard from a number of people already. You live in housing, that massing that shoves it towards the east with the housing neighborhoods are going to be very area. And I notice your 4 and 7 have a preference toward shoving. And so there seemed to be no middle ground, but I think that needs to be considered. Looking at those options, that how much is it going to intrude into houses and neighborhoods?
Well, so that is a very good point. Ultimately, we're not the decision makers. That's a conversation that you all need to have, with consultation with staff and ourselves. But ultimately, that's the kind of guidance that we need from all of you as you talk to constituents, as you talk to others. But that's very important. Yeah.
Yes. I just noticed that in some of the options, selling the senior center is considered when we retain the building. And I just want to point out to my colleagues that the long-term value of the city owning that lot far exceeds any amount of money we would get for the senior center. So I'd hope that we could just agree to take that off the table going forward.
So as far as I know, we have not done any sort of study about the sale of that property. It is largely outside of the scope of our work. So definitely something for you to consider at some point.
I was thinking about the tour that we got with CCC. And I'm thinking that the council would benefit from the same tour so that people who are wondering why we shouldn't just stay as it is could have those questions answered, to see how broken, I'm gonna say sick, this building is sick. I don't know if that's literally the case, but there's asbestos, the steps aren't up to code. There's only an elevator that works for half the building and not the other half of the building, etc. So I think if it's with you or not, I think it would benefit the council to have a tour of the as-is version to help. When you have to answer constituents' questions about why we need to do this, it might help you.
And I would add on to that, I know that schedules may make things very difficult, but being in the buildings when the buildings are occupied is really, really useful. How are folks at the senior center or at the library adapting to the spaces that they currently have? Same with City Hall. So if you can make that work, I think it's a great idea.
Yeah, that really
Katie,
helped. We
yeah.
talked with different people when we met up with them and we said, how is your space working? And they said, well, we have some of our stuff over here. We have some of our stuff in another building. We have some of our stuff in that meeting room that we can only use when da. So, yeah.
I have a question about combining purposes in one building. So these options, with the exception of the ones that would basically keep the buildings we have and renovate them, they include putting City Hall with either the senior center or the library. And I'm just wondering, were any of the municipalities that you visited, did they have examples of this? Because in my mind, it doesn't really make sense to package City Hall with either a senior center or the library. I think City Hall is pretty much a standalone entity. The senior center and the library could have seniors wanting to go visit the library. So that's kind of two questions. One, are there examples in other municipalities where there is this doubling up in one building and it's working? And two, why not combine the senior center and the library, which are both more recreational pursuits?
So I don't want to make up a answer on the fly. I don't remember specifically any of those combined functions, senior center and library. We can do a little bit of research on that for sure and get back to you. To your second point, there could potentially be opportunities for efficiency between a combined senior center building and library building. That would be something that we would have to study more.
I've previously served on the aging committee, which includes the senior center, for a good 4 or 5 years. And I will say prior to the pandemic, they were open. In fact, they were very open-minded to that. However, with the pandemic and all of the closures that we had to do and the weightiness of concerns that were going on globally, there became a change. And that's not to say that they wouldn't be interested in a conversation and coming back. However, there were a few reasons that the Aging Commission, over 4 years of talking about it, started to need some separate space. Now in Wanakee, from my recall, they have a senior center and a community center with a mixed hallway,
That's correct.
but separate facilities. So that's kind of different, but not like shared inner spaces. Another reason at that time was that the idea was, okay, we have a building and on Mondays, you all can have this room and we have capacity on that room and we can share. The one thing that our seniors really made clear over that committee process of years of dialogue is that our seniors do need more routine patterns, locations, sort of, this is our area, and I go down the hall and I, go to the right and I pass Jim Wexler or he greets me, the things that make your everyday. And I would never want to say that seniors need to have that, but it seemed to be a preference. And I say that because now I'm gearing towards 50, and even I'm like, oh, where did I put my keys? Where did I put that cell phone? And if we are changing things, which was pre-pandemic a concept, the feeling is they might get worried that they can't remember which room it was, and then they get frustrated and they're in the hallway. And so that is where they wanted a stable location and housed in a way that they could go in and know the routine, know where the staff is, know where their usual room is on Tuesdays, and when their other activities are Thursday. So that is my best recall.
Yeah, that is very, very fair. Something that I appreciate. Town, my parents live in town. They're getting up there. My mom in particular is a big senior center user. She's in my ear a fair amount about the importance of a space of their own. But that said, ultimately, cost is going to be very, very important. Tax impact is going to be very, very important. And cost considerations may require us to think outside the box about space as a whole and how space is co-utilized.
Can I ask just a clarification? Because
Sure,
based
and then
on,
Brian.
okay, based on what the mayor said, now I'm wondering, do any of these options for shared space involve blending of space, or are they two separate spaces? Because I'm not looking at any of these concepts and thinking some days this is going to be senior center functioning and other days this will be city hall functioning. I'm picturing separate buildings, maybe separate entrances, maybe a shared hallway, maybe a connection between the two. But I'm not envisioning the lack of routine, the everyday changing that the mayor just described. So can someone explain that?
So I hope this expands on this. When John earlier spoke about the program, right? And that's, kind of fancy language for essentially an accounting of all of the space and space wants. When we did this programming work, we essentially thought about the 3 different buildings in isolation. We didn't think a whole lot about shared space, common space that is co-utilized. So there may be, and I don't want to step on Bill's toes here, when thinking about budget and finance, maybe there's some opportunities to co-utilize space, so it is more efficient. Is that what?
I would prefer not to see space co-utilized.
Okay.
My
That is
point
good
sim-
input.
Yeah, my point, and I don't know if my colleagues agree, but I kind of think they, just based on body language. What I'm thinking is though that the senior center and the library make a better combined building because there are offices in those buildings, but they are not an office building like the city hall is. So that's all I'm saying, because I don't see any options where city hall is separate and there's a combined senior center and library.
Brian's next, and then I see you.
Sorry, just real quick, I wanted to follow up on your first original question of examples that we had seen. And correct me if I'm wrong, staff team, when we did our tours with the CCC members last fall, we stopped at Oak Creek. Some places at Oak Creek, it's a new facility, new building, but there's city hall functions and library on the other wing. So there's a shared kind of common area hallway. There are kind of council chambers type room on one side of the room, and then another kind of larger open conference space room that's available to be rented or used for events or activities. And then the library has their own separate space in a hallway, kind of just off that main lobby. That I think was the only one that had the combination of uses that I can recall that we saw in our tours, but Wanakee being another local example that does some combination.
Okay, thanks.
Just one more comment on putting buildings or uses together. I think this would be an excellent discussion to take to further steps, because there might be spaces, there might be, like, if a senior center and another use, let's say the library, came together, they may want their own spaces for meeting, for using and things like that, but there might be efficiencies. For instance, we've treated these as 3 separate buildings basically, but you think about if there is a central corridor, they're sharing the front door. They may not each want a front door. They may be sharing electrical rooms and building support rooms that may gain efficiencies while still functionally acting separately. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay. Maybe even restrooms. Maybe not. But I think those are kind of the next discussions, that there might be some more efficiencies to find.
Yeah, and again, I tend to agree with Lisa's. I think it would be kind of a nightmare if there were, in some ways, if there are shared spaces, just the coordination of who's meeting in that particular room and who's in charge of renting that room out based on the different, just the needs that I know from the library and how that changes daily and weekly and monthly, as well as all the different programming that the senior center does. So it would be very difficult, I think, programming wise, to share space.
All right, I'm gonna take one more question.
And I had basically
Yeah,
on
yeah.
that one more question related to that, but I mean, the 2 biggest buildings will be the senior center and the library in square footage. Is there room to put those 2 together on the lots that we're looking at?
So senior center and
Right.
city hall are essentially the same size. So
The library's a little bit bigger.
yes, that's correct.
So, but
Oh,
the idea of putting the library and the senior center together, that's a pretty massive building.
Yeah.
it would be
Bigger than
similar,
what it is now with the hall and the library.
be similar in size because city hall is roughly the same size as the program senior center. They're
Okay.
both roughly 30 to 35,000
Okay.
square feet.
Okay.
Or thereabouts. One consideration that we need to do a little bit of additional research on is fee-based programs and fee-based programs. So something that we need to think about. I don't have answers for you today. But definitely something to kind of keep in mind and something that we need to study a little bit more.
With Alder and Ira. But right now, you have city hall and library together. There was no intention of mixed functions there. And I don't think she was implying that by putting senior center, you would have mixed function. So I would like her, I would.
Okay, that's good.
Let's pause, because you wanted to pause, right, Andy? You wanted.
Yeah, so we're starting to kind of delve into some of the input that we want from you. I don't want to squelch this conversation, but Bill's presentation is super important. Let's get Bill an opportunity to get through his presentation, and then we'll start the dialogue again. Is that fair? Yeah. Okay, cool.
Yeah, thank you. So we took the information with the different options that were developed and the costing information that was provided by Findorf. And we worked with Ehlers and Associates, which is one of the leading financial advisors for municipalities in the state, to develop some conceptual financing plans so we could start to look at what this would look like if we're borrowing for these projects and what the estimated tax impacts are. So I'm going to start by giving a little bit of information to kind of set the context, looking at our debt management policy, the city's existing and planned capital debt, and touch on the potential impact of the TIF District number 3 closure, which is approaching. Then get into the assumptions for the financing options, and ultimately getting into what the projected tax impacts and impacts on the city's overall debt limit are, and finish with a couple other items for you to consider as we go through this process. So looking at the context, started with the city's debt management policy. This policy was adopted by the council back in 2017. It sets several parameters for uses of borrowing, what our process is going to be, what are eligible uses of borrowing, sets several targets. And two of the key targets that I wanted to bring up that relate to this conversation. Our first is our overall limit on the amount of debt that can be outstanding by the city. And by state law, municipalities are restricted to having outstanding debt of no more than 5% of the total equalized value of all property within the city. The city has chosen to self-limit because we don't want to be bumping right up against that legal debt capacity from the state. So we self-limit to 2/3 of that, or essentially 3.3% of total equalized value within the community. Based on our current outstanding debt as of today, we're in very good situation under both of those limits. We're at 14% of the state limit. We're at 22% of our self-imposed city limit. The other key target that's in that debt management policy is setting a target maximum for the portion of the city tax rate that goes towards debt service. When we levy property taxes as a city, we levy them for operating as well as debt. And we have established through the policy a goal target of $2.10 per $1,000 of equalized value for our debt service portion of the tax rate. The policy does allow that can be exceeded by referendum for special projects. And currently we're at $1.28 per thousand. So we do have some capacity under that limit. This slide looks similar to one that we include with our budget materials each year. There's a lot going on in this graph, but this is looking at, with the numbers and the bars, with the scale on the left, what is our annual debt service levy, the amount that we are collecting through taxes to pay for debt service. And the various colored bars are showing different components of our debt. So we have borrowing for our general capital needs that we do each year, and then our facilities. We're paying off the Municipal Operations Center, MLC, police station, and the fire and EMS facilities. And you'll see that over time, that existing debt is going down. Various facility debt drops off as it's fully repaid, starting with fire and EMS, and then the police station, and finally the MOC debt dropping off after 2032. We also would be paying down this orange bar, which represents our general capital. But we also know that we're going to have additional ongoing annual capital needs, and that's what's represented by the gray bar. We are assuming that we would have $4 million of annual capital borrowing for general purposes, and that would be increasing by about $200,000 per year. And we're showing that being layered in. The red line is looking at the tax rate for debt service. So that item where our policy sets the target of $2.10 per thousand. We're currently at about $1.28. What we're projecting based on our existing debt for facilities and planned capital improvements before we look at the facility project, that we would see a peak in 2026 at about $1.35 per thousand. And then as this debt is being paid off, that would be declining over time, finally setting into a level of around just under $1 per thousand as some of this additional debt is paid off. So that planned decrease in our debt service as some of our other debt is paid off does give us some capacity to take on a new facility project and layer that into our existing debt. Touching on TIF District number 3 closure, the council has taken action to do the affordable housing extension that would run through April of 2026. We're anticipating that there would be action to close that TIF district by April 15th of next year. And then the impact of that TIF district closure will impact the 2026 tax levy, which is for our 2027 budget year. And we're estimating right now that with the closure of that TIF district, that there'll be about $720 million of tax base that's currently in the TIF district, which becomes available for the city's general tax levy. And when we add that, we're taking the amount of taxes that we need to collect and levy, we're dividing that by a larger tax base. And so we would tend to see property tax rates go down, all else being equal. So we do know that there is some capacity from that additional tax base that could also help us both accommodate additional facility costs as well as additional operating costs from the levy limit adjustment when the TIF district closes. So that's been factored into this analysis. As we get into the financing plans, I want to emphasize, just as the consultant team did, that these are conceptual. We're very early in the process. Numbers will change, both on the construction cost side, interest rates, things will change over time, but this will hopefully give a good estimate, snapshot of the ballpark range of these estimates. The consultants talked about the different options, so I won't repeat that information. Couple of assumptions that are unique to the financing information. These were based on initial numbers provided by Findorf. They were prior to the addition of the $5 million that were identified for the on-site energy needs. It would impact all of these options, and that's something that we'll include as we do future iterations of these estimates. We had to make some assumptions about equalized value increases. We looked at what the city's value increases have been over time historically, and then discounted those somewhat to hopefully have conservative numbers. Incorporated the TID closure that I had just talked about. We're assuming additional capital borrowing each year because we know this will not be the only city project and we'll have those additional capital borrowings factored in. For the community campus borrowing, we're assuming that we're borrowing over 20 years, which is the maximum allowable for general obligation debt. Looking at a time frame of 2027 to issue that debt, interest-only payments in the first year, and then amortizing that over the remaining term. And at this point, we have not included any potential offsets, things like impact fees or fundraising or grants that might be out there. Those may help reduce the cost somewhat. It's unlikely that any of those are going to significantly reduce the cost that we're looking at here. And then finally, for the interest rates assumptions, this was based on a recent bond issue by City of Green Bay. Their bond rating is not quite as high as the City of Middleton, so hopefully there's a little bit of conservativeness built in by using those rates. For purposes of the financial plans, we grouped a couple of the options. So we looked at a financing plan for options 2 and options 3. Those would be borrowings of about $25 and about $85 million. Options 4 and 5, the hybrid options with some renovations and then some new construction, are relatively close in cost. So for purposes of this analysis, we looked at an average borrowing of about $112 million. And then likewise for the options 6 and 7, the all new constructions options, we're looking at a borrowing of about $134 million, which again are all in the ballpark. Numbers will be adjusted and will include the on-site energy generation in future updates as we narrow down the options. So with that said, diving into the financial impacts. Looking at first option, which is the option 2, remodel within the existing footprint only. The analysis puts together what the annual tax levy would be, what the tax rate impact would be, and then what the estimated tax impact would be on the average home in Middleton, which for the current year is an equalized value or fair market value of about $520,000. So we'd be projecting that the tax rate for debt service would go up to $1.40 per thousand. Total debt service taxes on that average home would be $728. Of that, $163 would be the marginal impact from the community campus project, and the marginal tax rate impact, 31 cents per thousand. I should note that in all of these options, the tax impacts, we're looking at what is the year with the highest impact, which is generally in the early years, and then the potential that that might go down over time as more tax base is added. So trying to look at what's the biggest year impact to the tax impact. Then moving into option 3, which is the remodel with additions, but no completely new buildings, roughly an $85 million borrowing. With that option, total tax rate for debt service would go to $1.85 per thousand. Of that, roughly 95 cents would be for the community campus borrowings. Total debt service on the average home, $963 per year, and the marginal impact from the community campus borrowing, just under $500 per year. Then moving to options 4 or 5, the hybrid options, borrowing of $112 million. With this scenario, the financing plans are showing that the total debt service tax rate would be at $2.11 per thousand. So essentially at what is currently identified as the target in the city's debt management policy of $2.10. Of that, $1.26 would be for the community campus project. And that tax impact for this project and borrowing on the average home, about $659 per year on the average home for the highest year. And then finally, looking at options 6 and 7, which are the new construction. Under that scenario, the projected tax rate for debt service would go up to $2.32 per thousand, $1.47 of that for this project, with the impact in the highest year for the average home at $767 per year. And then we have a couple slides that look at comparisons of these. First, I wanted to go back to the item in the city's debt management policy related to the overall debt limit. So this is the amount that legally and by policy we're allowed for outstanding debt. All of the different options are shown to be within the city's debt capacity as defined by our policy. The range goes from option 2, which would peak at about 30% of our debt capacity utilized, up to the option 6 and 7, new construction, which are at about 80%. And looking at the tax rate for debt service, this graph looks at what I'm just calling our base capital improvement plan for 2028 to pick a single year of where we would be. And then the marginal impact as you see the additional options for option 2, 3, 4, and 5, kind of going up to that current policy target limit. And then option 6 and 7, which would require through referendum and council action going above that target to $2.30. Looking at the taxes on the average home, this first slide looks at just the portion of the city levy and taxes for debt service. So looking at what the average home would be paying for debt service under our base scenario, and then the impacts of the various options ranging from $122 up to the new construction options at about $645. To put that in context of the city's overall tax bill, because that's what residents are going to look at, is not what portion of my bill goes for debt service. They'd look at what is the total amount of taxes I'm paying for the city. This next slide looks at what would be the total city taxes projected for that average home. And under the base operating and our base capital improvements, that'd be a little over $2,000 per year for the annual taxes. You can see in context then the various options, which range from about a 6% increase up to about a 30% increase for the most expensive new construction options. Just a word about the various options, and Andy touched on this a little bit. There are opportunities to refine these options. So it's not that if we want new construction, it has to be this dollar amount. Part of the feedback that I think we're looking for from the Community Campus Committee and the council are what are the pros and cons of the different options, but also what is your feedback on the cost? And if the thought is it's really important to have new construction, or at least for some of the facilities to be new construction, but some of these price tags are just not palatable, that would be good feedback to have so the team can go back and look at what would it look like to have a new construction or a hybrid option that hits certain targets that we're comfortable with. Finally, a couple other considerations before we open up to questions. One thing I wanted to note is the city currently has a very good bond rating with Moody's Investor Service. Annually, when we go to the market to issue debt, Moody's reviews the city's parameters. They assign a rating. Our rating of AA1 is the second highest possible rating, only behind a AAA. And looking at some of the metrics, we're really close and potentially on the cusp of reaching a AAA at some point in the future. However, I did want to point out that one of the key factors that they look at is the amount of outstanding debt and other liabilities that you have. So if the city takes on an additional amount, a large amount of borrowing, that would be a negative indicator in Moody's eyes. That's not an indication that they would reduce our rating, but it's certainly one thing that would be considered. We feel by using the example interest rates of City of Green Bay, which is a AA3, which is actually 2 notches below our bond rating, that we are building in some conservative assumptions about interest rates. But that is just something for us to be aware of as we go into this project. The other consideration I wanted to bring up is that we would not be looking at this one project in a vacuum. There are other things over the next 10, 20 years that the city is going to be considering, or even shorter time frame. On the capital side, at some point, we'd likely be looking at some type of EMS satellite facility to serve the east side of the community. There are needs identified for a community center, for park and recreation programs. We have an older aquatic center that has required additional maintenance and capital investment. And there's also potential for TIF and development debt. And that's something that we need to consider when we're looking at our overall debt capacity. On the operating side, there are items that we may need to look at, whether at some point the city needs to go to a third EMS crew, if there's additional staffing needs for a new facility, we're significantly adding space. Presumably there'll be additional staffing and maintenance needs on an operating basis, as well as just other staffing needs from the growth of community and the results of the organizational study that's going on right now. In all of this analysis, I've only been looking at the debt service tax rate. So I am anticipating that from the TID closure or from other growth, that there will be some capacity on the operating side for some of these additional costs. But as we look on messaging to the community and planning and future referendum, it'll be important to factor all of these in and kind of look at what's the total story of all of these needs of the city. I know that was a lot of information. I'd be happy to answer any questions or go back and revisit anything. You can also open up to the larger discussion for feedback.
Oh, go ahead, Mayor.
I just wanted to say thank you, Bill. That was a very good overview on both, what that would look like, what our average taxes are, plus the options. That's really helpful for us to have that robust discussion. And I really like that you laid it in with other things that are going on, because maybe we all feel you can do $500 to $600 more a year. Public may not, but maybe we do. But if we're not thinking about it in those, there's other things out there. So I'm glad you put it in that context. And I very much appreciate all of the information you provided.
Charles, go ahead.
Bill, thank you for breaking all this down. My question is about the possibility of a downgrade of our rating from Moody's. Do you feel that your model is sufficiently conservative in that regard with Green Bay? They're at 46% of their value term debt. And I just wanted to know if there was a possibility of us dropping to A1 instead of AA3.
I would be very surprised if we would see that much of a drop. Debt service is one factor, and other liabilities is one factor. Rating is roughly 20% of the overall rating. If we were to see an adjustment, I would expect it would be more of a marginal adjustment from a AA1 to perhaps a AA2, potentially a AA3. I would not expect to see a drop further than that. We are going to be doing a rating call with Moody's coming up in the next few weeks for the capital borrowing that we just discussed at the Finance Committee and discussion that we had on Tuesday. We are planning, and each year as part of those calls, we do talk about future borrowing projections. Last year when we met with them, we did let them know that we were going through this planning process. We didn't have any cost estimates at that time. We are planning to share the range of cost estimates with them and ask them for feedback. If the city were to take on debt at these levels, how would they see that impact our rating? And while they can't guarantee anything, I think we could get a pretty good read from that of what is the potential and what would be the size of any action.
Okay, thank you.
Bill, when you went through the increase for an average home, an average tax bill, that's not actual because of the closing of TID 3, right? That's going to buffer a lot of that?
No, good question. Yeah.
Yeah, so for the analysis, we did factor in the anticipated closure of TID 3,
Oh, you did.
and we did factor in the planned decrease in our existing debt service. So
Gotcha.
this is,
Okay,
with those other impacts, this is what we're projecting in those years.
got it.
What I have not factored in is any difference on the operating side.
Mm,
So if the city's operating levy and tax rate for that side were to go down, that potentially could help offset some of the impact on the debt service. But looking at the debt service side, we did try to factor that in.
thanks. Anybody else?
Other question? Oh, yes.
I was going to, if it's okay, can I pivot back to my question, not finance related?
I'll leave that up to Andy. What's your
Uh,
question?
So my question was
Okay.
going to pivot away from the
Yeah.
finance to a little bit of what we were talking about before. And I was going to ask, did the committee consider a public-private option? I'm thinking of the library on Midvale with the condos above it.
Sure.
Not saying that it would have to be the library with condos above it, but say, City Hall with condos above it or townhomes or whatever that looks like. I'm asking because as we meet with developers, there has been some chatter asking if we're thinking about it because we are also, and I know the council knows, but we're doing our affordable housing 1-year extension. And so we're already having some of that chat and they're wondering if we had considered that. So can you speak to that?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a very good question because Milwaukee libraries, a couple of Madison libraries are housed on, essentially the first floor of some sort of development. We did in 2019 and 2020 have within our scope some considerations about development, both on Hubbard and Elmwood. That has been removed from our scope of work. The general consensus was there are so many different moving parts and pieces just within the public buildings themselves. Let's focus our attention on the public spaces. So to answer your question specifically, no, we haven't done any work at all on kind of the development side.
Well, I appreciate that, Ed. The reason I'm trying to think about that is as we are trying to afford 3 municipal buildings, if we're thinking about moving 2 public buildings into 1 for shared utilities or things. And we always talk about density as part of our, vision of a city, and to be role models and stewards of leading through these times. It just strikes me that of that momentous of a project, wouldn't be thinking about if a developer wanted to pay us money to put condos above something, that the efficiencies gained and the footprint and things like that. So I just want to be careful because if we're talking about money is really important and making sure that we're doing good things with the money that we have and we're finding efficiencies, but definitely not.
Mhm.
That's a little odd to me.
It's a very, very good question to pose. Right now, I think we need to focus our attention on the public buildings. We're essentially kind of wrapping up our study, potentially by June, maybe July. At some point in the future, that's a consideration for sure. But again, just not something that we have considered during the current iteration of the CCC.
So Andy, you're saying that it can be done basically after the fact? If it's something we want to do, it'll have to be baked into. Bill. Okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that in the earlier work back done in 2019 and 2020, looking at trying to free up potential land for either sale or development, and what the financial impact of that could be was something we started to look at. In the scale of the numbers that we're talking about here, it was not a significant generator. So it might generate, a few percentage, but it wasn't likely that we're going to be able to free up enough land or enough space to significantly reduce the scale of the numbers we're looking at. And one reason for that is if we look at the space needs in the program and trying to fit that within the space, there's already a fairly substantial level of stories and massing to these buildings. So there's not a lot of opportunity to go significantly higher within the character of the downtown for the development here. We also thought about even if there is some excess space that potentially could be sold, and this kind of goes to the discussion about the current senior center building, that when you're looking at the value of that land to the city for the long term, you look at not just this iteration, but 25, 40, 50 years down the road, what is the value to the city of at least retaining control of that land versus selling it?
Gotcha.
Oh, sorry, are we pivoted back to general discussion?
Let's let Andy.
Yeah, do you want to bring that up, Brian, the first PowerPoint? Yeah, absolutely. Let's pivot away. You can ask whatever question or make whatever comments you want. I would ask you to do this. Let's try to stay fairly high level here. Let's focus on options. Let's focus on cost. Let's focus on tax impact right straight away. Okay.
If I could just jump in, Abby reminded me of one more comment that we looked at about the public-private back in 2019, 2020. There are a lot of restrictions on using tax-exempt municipal financing if there is a private component to the building. That could likely push us into having to do taxable financing with a significantly higher interest rate. So that is a consideration as well.
Good to know. Thank you.
And maybe one final point to that is, I think the density was a good issue. And with the density comes, sometimes we've seen, while these projects are commonly done, there are sometimes parking challenges. So just to keep that in mind.
Yes.
So I was asking if we were pivoted back to that because I had something on that subject. So yeah, so for the discussion of multiple buildings under one building envelope, I'm not opposed to it, but my question is whether people think that we'd be able to reconcile the sort of access controls in a building like City Hall with either of the other two proposed buildings. It may make sense to make sure that we keep City Hall separate, or if we're doing it, to actually break it out by floors for a lot of it. That's a little bit more nuts and bolts, but just at a high level, when we're making that choice, it might just make more sense to keep City Hall separate.
Yeah, well, we're having a big conversation here. So that's a great point. Great question. Lisa, you had mentioned that earlier. Let's get other people's thoughts on kind of the mix of buildings, knowing that we still need to do some investigation with respect to fee free. Yes.
I know early on, there was also some discussion about maybe some of these buildings could be somewhere else in the city. I think about the city building, for the government itself could maybe be relocated. Massing issue, but I wonder if any discussions was done on those bases, and obviously it's not on the table now.
There were some very ancillary discussions early on in the process. We had talked about, potentially satellite libraries somewhere else. we were told to focus on the downtown. And there was a fantastic presentation from the libraries and other city staff about why downtown was so important when it was first developed. So I will send that presentation to you if you don't already have it. But it's a fair point, for sure.
Go ahead, Lisa.
I like the idea of eventually someday having a satellite library. The Sequoia Commons, though, I mean, that's a branch library in that whole development. I don't think any main campus of a library, not that I'm aware of, has apartments or condos above it. But certainly I could see something like that in Bishop's Bay, somewhere on the north side, that could be a feasible public-private partnership, maybe with enough private financing that we wouldn't need to worry about municipal borrowing to pay for the small portion that would be public. I'm wondering, and I think, for me, Bill said it right, these dollar amounts are somewhat unpalatable. They're daunting. And so I'm wondering, has any thought been given to the city trying to acquire an existing office building? And it doesn't have to be downtown, obviously, but acquiring an existing office building to house our city hall staff, and take that new construction project off the table, like make do with what we can get.
We're not commercial real estate agents, nor is Findorf or SEH. So I can't answer that question. There are people we know for sure that do that work. Ultimately, that would have to be, direction from all of you in consultation with city staff. See if that's something that needs to be discussed.
And again, just to be careful about that, I mean, that is an option, but if some of those spaces are in current or future TIF districts, that then complicates the payback on those TIF districts. If we buy them, they now become tax exempt. And so now we're changing the calculation for our TIF districts. One of the parcels that we had, had some very preliminary conversations about was, half of the cost of the renovation option. So just to buy that building with not a cent spent on getting it retrofitted for City Hall, and then what's the community benefit for moving it that far out of the downtown? So that would be something that the council would have to think about. If are you hearing from constituents that is something that's important to them, having it downtown versus being flexible to have it elsewhere? That would have to be part of that consideration as well. The market is challenging for commercial right now. So we can take a look at it if that's what the council wants, but there are some additional complications with us as a potential buyer out there.
And I've got a question, I guess to you. One thing we haven't really talked about is Parks and Rec programs that uses the senior center, uses City Hall. How is that factored into the City Hall? At least for office space, that's part of the City Hall square footage.
Yeah, Parks and Rec is not the programming related to Parks and Rec is not included in any of the programming.
The office space.
The office space for Parks and Rec is of course,
and I
but
know
in
that
terms of the programming space,
Yeah.
no.
And they do, and then Parks and Rec does summertime stuff in here for registration and another. That's another kind of big part of what the city does and how that's going to be used. So.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and kind of to follow up on Alderman Ireland, I think what we're getting at here is we're trying to think of some questions that we're going to get, and that's one we're going to get. They're going, because when they see the implications to their taxes, they're going to say, "Did you look at all these alternatives?" And the other thing that they'll say is, "So you already said that we're not doing these, but you haven't even gotten public input yet." So I think we just need to be cognizant. We're just bringing up these things that what we're pretty sure constituents are going to bring up, especially with the tax, repercussions. And so we want to be comprehensive in being able to answer those questions, and when they bring those up, that we can answer that. And so this gets back to my initial comment, I think, because I'm going to get these questions when they look at the tax implications. What are the specific differences with the options? And so I think, like functionality wise, you've got area in there and parking spaces, but what are the functionality differences? Like if we construct new, it's about $20 million more than if we rent it. Are there future cost savings to constructing new? So just those types of things I think are going to be really important when we go out to the public, because I think what we're preparing you for is what some of the questions we're going to hear that we want to be able to address.
Absolutely. And again, to reiterate earlier, communication is going to be absolutely critical moving forward, as will be engagement. We want to make sure that you are well armed to have rich conversations with your friends, your family, your neighbors, et cetera. And we can absolutely do that. We're meeting periodically with a smaller communications team, a staff team, to focus in on communications related topics. So we can definitely prepare some messaging for all of you. That said, we are taking the first step with you tonight. We didn't want to get out in front of the CCC or the community at large. We're looking to share information with you tonight, and then subsequently talk about how to communicate this really important information out more publicly.
No, I just want to say thank you for all of your information, and to Bill for putting that together. That was really informative to me. I want to just say that I think it's vitally important to keep our city services in the downtown area. I like the idea of moving, say, a satellite branch of the library or the kids community center out into a place where there's more kind of parks and rec space. But I think that it's vitally important to keep those city services centrally located for the citizens of Middleton. I also think it's really important to keep those communities together and intact. City Hall is City Hall. It's the vital heartbeat of the city. It's where all of the staff and us come together. It's important to have that space. And I actually prefer the idea of having City Hall as its own separate building, A, for that reason, and B, quite frankly, for security purposes. And as far as the library and senior center being combined, it's not objectionable. I think with and again, pardon me, I got appointed to the Commission on Aging, but I haven't actually met with that group yet. But my sense with my discussions with Tammy Derrickson was that what they're really looking to keep intact is that sense of community. They know they're going to have to move spaces, and I would assume that most of them want more space. They want more opportunities to have more classes, more meeting spaces, more private spaces. And so it's important, I think, in general design to keep that intact, whether it's part of the library building or not. Like, I think we can be open to that as a concept, but those are important.
That's important feedback.
Thank you.
There's been a lot of conversation about which function goes where. Several of you have weighed in on this. We're obviously not making decisions tonight. Is there additional input on that topic in particular that you'd like to provide to the CCC, which meets on May 22nd, and the consultant team, all of us and staff as well?
I agree. I love what she said, and I agree with that.
Okay.
Mhm.
Other thoughts?
Alder Lorman, did you have a question?
Yeah, kind of a couple things. Looking at it from a more demographic standpoint, looking at the future of really our population and our society, and I don't think there's going to be the capacity to pay for options 4 and 5, and because the next generation of people that are kind of moving out of the workforce and moving into retirement are going to be the largest population in the US. And
we're now going to be moving into a group of people that are going to really rely on fixed income. We're also moving into an economic time for the Madison area and our state. That's going to have significant impact in terms of, I think, some reducing funding. We rely heavily on health education, research and science in Dane County, and they're going to be significantly impacted by changes in our federal government for the next several years. And once something's taken away, it's very hard to give it back. And right now, some of our largest employers in the area are even struggling financially to kind of meet some of their goals, especially in healthcare and education. That shortfalls in the hundreds of millions of dollars. So I think we have to be cautious. But at the same time, I think Middleton, the residents of Middleton value the city, value the infrastructure of the city services. Senior center is vital, library is vital. And I think it's a reasonable request to have functional modern buildings for staff. But I think about it in more of a phased approach. Maybe more efficient to say, let's do it all right now, because we're going to save X amount of money by doing it once. But look at it from a citizen's perspective, when all they're looking at is their tax bill each month or each well, a couple times a year, right? So what if the tax bill goes up but stays up? Not in the hundreds of dollars, but a more reasonable amount, and just stays that way for the future, and you build into it. So then we do phased work for each one of our needs in the city. I'm a real believer in that kind of compromise. I think it needs to be done, but in a measured approach that is palatable.
Okay, very thoughtful comments. I definitely appreciate that. Let's have some more reaction to that in particular. Cost, tax impact. Yes, ma'am.
I really liked your thoughts on that. Especially from thinking about those, I talked to a lot of widows when I ran, and maybe I was very cognizant, as we had heard from the Aging Commission for a few years on this topic. And they were okay with some increase, like in general, voters at doors were okay with some increase. They felt $50 to $60 million spending on this they could handle. Of course, that's like couple years ago, so maybe there's some inflation, but they can't afford their eggs right now. So, you know, cautious. I like the word cautious. That would land us towards option 3. But your phased approach might be a better approach, because maybe you could do a little bit more. It's just sustained over time. So maybe that is your guiding post, and maybe others heard differently. But since I did doors across the city, people just wanted us to be cautious with their tax dollars. They do want to support the services, like he was saying. They do support the city of Middleton, but they were also afraid of being priced out of their house and having to leave the city because they couldn't afford the taxes. So I'm glad you are all thinking about this.
Yes.
Yeah, just to, and I'm just big conceptual level here. I wonder if there is a way for us to model out a combination of Dave and Lisa's ideas of potentially having some of what it would look like if we planned on expanding some library services, but potentially moving others to a satellite branch. Or book or physical books to a satellite branch that would be constructed in a different part of the city later as funds became available, and see if we actually do save money that way on the overall construction cost initially, just to move our spending around. I also, all of the constituents who I talked to about specifically were very concerned about increases to their taxes, and this is every option presented here that was passed on by the community campus committee, so options 4 through 7 far exceeds in terms of increase to their taxes, particularly the senior citizens on fixed incomes, any amount that I think they would be willing to stomach.
Oh, sorry. Can we let?
Would it be okay if I offered a perspective that I haven't heard tonight?
Yeah.
So I'm going to be on your side of the room
Yeah.
where the fan's blowing. There's your feedback on which uses can go together and where, and that's been very helpful. But there's a significant cost component to each of these options that we haven't really talked about. And I think some people might ask, and that's the underground parking component. In each of these options, there's 80 to 100 underground parking stalls. It's very costly to build underground parking stalls. I know we're downtown and we don't want to sea of asphalt, but that is a very expensive component that we might want to pull out for you just to have as reference.
I think that's important. Bill, in your presentation, you're talking about an average house. Half of Middleton has more than that. I know myself, when I'm looking at it, your numbers were like $1,100. My tax bill, which is a big chunk. And I think you're going to have half. Really, really hard to sell.
To the Alder Lorman's point about doing this in phases, and I know phasing is hugely complicated. But I look at Bill's slide showing our debt, and we didn't do the fire station, the police department, and what's the last one, the mock. We didn't do those in one fell swoop. We phased those in. Could have done, some sort of operations and emergency services project, but we didn't. And I'm wondering if it would be possible to prioritize, as much as I agree that this is the worst building, because I go to all 3 of these. I don't know if any of my colleagues go to the senior center, but I'm there every Friday that I can be for pinochle. So I know all 3 of these buildings, and yet I think of this building the way parents think about things like, well, I really would like a new coat, but my kids need the coats, So I think of the senior center and the library as really needing their space expanded, whereas, City Hall can muddle on through for a little longer with what we've got. So I ask for this or suggest that we consider this, recognizing that a lot of work has gone into what we're hearing tonight, both on your part and the staff and the CCC. So I totally appreciate all that you've done and recognize that this is kind of asking you to redo a big chunk of it. But I just feel like when I think ahead to asking our residents to let us increase their taxes, I'm thinking about it for things like getting raises for our staff or being able to hire new staff. And I don't want to bite off more than we can chew. I don't want to, ask them for a very large increase compared to what we've done recently. And then when we go to ask for money to pay for staff to now fill some of these spaces or, make up for staff that we haven't been able to hire in the past, they might say no. So it's a tough balancing act.
I want to offer the other side of that coin. And I totally agree with you on wanting to be able to give the staff raises. I also want to introduce the idea of maybe the frustration of these space limitations, and perhaps someone wouldn't take a job with us because there's like no place for them to have a desk. Something like that. I just want, I don't know. I just want that thought in there.
So to your point,
There.
absolutely part of the process, right? We are starting the conversation tonight. We're hearing cost related concerns. That's the exact sort of feedback that we want and we need in order to revise. Again, iterative process. We're hearing from you that maybe doing some sifting and winnowing is important. And there are a couple of ways to kind of push and pull on this, right? We reduce square footage, we phase things, we reduce the kind of the fit and finish. There are only a certain number of ways to do this, and we certainly can explore a couple of those moving forward.
Go.
Oh, I was gonna say, I like the idea brought up about parking, because building more parking or complex parking or expensive parking or accommodating cars goes against a lot of what we've been trying to do in the city, and that is encourage other forms of transportation. Granted, for senior citizens, that's a different discussion to be able to get to a senior center and services, but so, yeah, look at certainly things like that. It's better to accommodate space for people than cars. And if that's that kind of money is going into it, then please put that on your pick list.
Important point. I just want to do a time check real quick here. We're at, if my clock is correct, a little bit after 8 o'clock. I'll leave it in your hands to determine continuation or not.
If the council's willing, we'll go 4 more minutes.
I think he had his first and then Alder Schaefer.
And I had quite, and in terms of phasing, I mean, and I don't know if this is Bill or you guys, if we delay construction on a particular building, how much cost is added in to that? I mean, in some ways it is more palatable if you can break it apart and do it slowly, but does the city end up and taxpayers end up paying more in the long run by spreading this out longer and future construction costs, stuff like that? One thing, and maybe this is more for council, in terms of communications, but I think one of the things that we also need to communicate that the citizens get is how good things are with the library and the senior center and the programming that's done. And I think that's one of the ways that we can sell this is we need more space to do all of it. City, yeah, it's going to cost more, but how do we maintain and expand on what we do well or what our staff does well?
Right. Right.
So that's part of the communication that we have to,
Yeah,
when people say, I can't afford this,
absolutely.
is including, our selling points too.
Yeah, good point.
Okay, let's be respectful of time. Couple of more parting shots here, and then I've got just a real quick bit on next steps.
I noticed some of the different designs have different amounts of service per. So you can go back, are there ways to rearrange to keep as much surface work as possible to eliminate some of the expensive?
Okay, yes.
Did anybody look at a parking structure to take, because I don't like the idea of having, a sea of asphalt on the surface. I think one of our goals is to try to eliminate as much just surface parking as possible in the downtown area. So I could imagine a small, multi-level structure, ideally with a solar canopy or something, to take the place of some of the parking that is shown as surface parking, and maybe eliminate some of the underground parking if that is a huge cost saving. So I think it would be useful to see how that breaks out. And I I had asked in email if the parking numbers meet the standards in our new zoning code, and I'm gonna guess they do, because I know Abby's on top of things like that. but
Mhm.
It's something we should make sure to confirm.
Okay, so the consultant team will collectively kind of get our heads around cost of underground parking versus maybe some structured parking above ground. It's sounding to me like communications is going to be really important moving forward. Sustainability is a significant value, and one of our different parts and pieces to pull on, sustainability probably isn't one. Are we nodding heads yes or no? Thumbs up? Okay, all right. Costs seem to be a concern, significant concern in some cases. It sounds like that's one of the parts that we need to pull on, right? Try to find a couple of different middle ground options, so to speak, that might incorporate some phasing, that might incorporate fewer square feet, something to that effect, right? Is that what I'm hearing? Yes? Yes? Okay. All right. It looks like we need to explore this idea of fee and free with the combination of the library and the senior center, something to explore. Yes? Yes?
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Yes. Yes. Okay. I think those are the big things. I know that Brian was taking some detailed notes. I just want to spend just a real quick moment to close here to talk about next steps. We're on May 7th. We're having our committee of the whole workshop. The city is in the process of doing this matrix that evaluates the different options against the goals. May 22nd, CCC has a meeting, and potentially its last meeting. We need to get some more input from them and possibly wrap that up with a presentation to develop for June 3rd, a council meeting where we, kind of put a bow on things. There may be at some point a report that comes later. We're in development there, but you will likely not see the detailed report on June 3rd. That said, it will likely be chunky. We've got, 15, 20 different appendices and a lot of text to prepare. Next slide, Brian. Okay. Let's just think long-term here, real quick. We're kind of wrapping up this study phase, summer, fall of 20 foot from the community that we provide to you, that then invariably include a community-wide survey. We're thinking about community-wide survey potentially sometime in spring 2026. That would provide you with the hard data to help narrow down to a single option, right? And preferably a.
Is he going to the golf meeting?
Yeah.
Do you want to talk?
Madam Chair,
Yes.
we, given the late.
We're not, excuse me, we're not adjourned.
Not a joint.
We adjourn.
That's right.
Like a nominal charge, right?
Join.
And
We have to de-join.
free space.
Didn't know what that was. Can I just, we're not quite adjourned yet, so just give me 1 second here. Given the lateness of the hour, we can skip over the future cow items. We'll again look at schedules for another cow meeting at some point in the I don't want to say not too distant future, but in the future.
I did have one request for a potential agenda item. I know you've got like a long list, but I noticed the explaining the department's interpretation of DEI and also the obligation of municipalities to comply with federal ICE agents. And I'm guessing may have gotten letters like that from other departments.
That's the first one, first and only one as of now.
Okay. I think in the future, it would be good to have a discussion about like, what do we do with this?
Okay.
Because I'm not clear what
That's a good
we're
one.
supposed to do. So,
Okay, that's fair. I'll put that down.
Okay. Now we're adjourned. Thanks, everybody.